Hello and welcome to the Saturday Down South podcast, a very special edition of the Saturday Down South podcast. It just meant more. I'm O'Gara, he is Chris Marler. Today we are discussing 2001, number 5 Tennessee against number 2 Florida.
Number 4 Tennessee.
It's
already
number 5. I went back and looked it up. They had number 5, or they had number 4 on the broadcast. That's a little discrepancy. They would just take whatever ranking was higher. I went back and I looked it up because I saw that difference, and I made sure that in the AP poll they were ranked number 5. So they were technically number 5 at the time.
Were they at number 4 in the BCS?
Yeah, number 4 in the BCS or whatever it was. But we go by AP poll because the BCS is dead.
I just heard you say 2001, and I just honestly went into like rebellious teenager mode. So yep. I just wanted to argue. Yes. I don't freaking care, dude. I don't give a crap.
This game for you has probably a little bit of a different memory than it does for me, because I honestly, when we were talking about games to do, this game did not ring a bell, because if you don't grow up in the SEC and you're 11 years old, you don't consume this game. This game was almost 20 years ago now, which for some of you listening is crazy to think about, but the circumstances surrounding it were incredible. I mean, absolutely incredible. We're going to dig into a lot of different stuff with this game, but just to sort of set the scene, if maybe you haven't watched this game yet, or you just did, you need a little bit of context, whatever it is. By the way, I recommend everybody do that. Yeah. We put the game out there before we record these podcasts so that you can go back and rewatch it yourself and then follow along with some of these great details, and maybe hopefully we can provide some of the context that goes along with it. So, this game became famous for a variety of reasons. One of which was because it was Spurrier's last game in the Swamp. Spurrier, after this year, went to the Washington Redskins. It was after the bowl game, a move that, looking back on it, just seems so crazy and bizarre. And 20 years later, I don't think it would necessarily happen. I think that it's just really, really weird the way that all that went down, even looking back now.
After they played a Ralph Friedgen-led Maryland Terrapins in the Orange Bowl, a BCS Bowl, he then decided that 12 years was enough at one school. That's what he said. He's like, I've probably been here too long, and then went to Washington for 2 years. Yeah.
So this game, though, at the time, you don't know that it's Spurrier's last game. So that doesn't necessarily set the stage, or last game at the Swamp, I should say. That in itself doesn't necessarily set the stage for all the drama of this game. This game was wild because 9/11, the attacks on our country and the World Trade Towers, that postponed the week of games that was supposed to be the third Saturday in September, when this game is always played, of course. So this game, Tennessee, Florida, which everybody knows, it's September. That's just the way that it's always been done.
So that used to be the first CBS game of the year. They didn't have games the first 2 weeks. This was the first game of the year. It was the best.
And this game instead is played on December 1st, and it's the regular season finale late in the year, and don't you know it, there is a division title at stake. It is essentially a playoff quarterfinal game. Even Vern said on the broadcast, because Auburn and LSU were actually playing that night. Right. So it was essentially a 4-team SEC tournament, and this was like a quarterfinal playoff type game. And because Nebraska and Oklahoma had lost the week before, it opened the door for the national championship. So the set of circumstances surrounding this game are very, very atypical.
It's so weird, yeah. Well, and one thing, because it's 2001, and it did bring up a lot of memories, and it was like fun memories. But then, like, I'm not saying this to be funny. I forgot how much I hated Tennessee and Philip Fulmer, like, growing up. And again, I'm not trying to, like, I know I'm like an adult now, but I forgot like how much I hated that
because
team.
They were good though, and
they beat us every year.
They
beat Bama every single year. This is literally in the middle of losing 7 straight to them. This was the last year of the 7-game series. I forgot how much I disliked Casey Clausen. Just a lot of stuff, but it was also fun because it's like I was invested in this game strictly because I was pulling for Florida, and because I didn't want to see. I tell you what, like as like a Bama fan growing up. The biggest nightmare for anything postseason, like an SEC championship game, is Tennessee and Auburn playing. It's like, what in the hell? Like, what? Who do I cheer for? So it was interesting because of that, but it was also weird because like they pushed the games back, and like a lot of teams were playing, but it also was the same weekend like Army Navy. So that just kind of gets like kind of lost in the mix of all
I
this.
didn't realize that.
I saw it on the bottom line. I was like, that's kind of odd because you would think they would, especially in that year. I assumed they would push that back. They didn't. There was just a lot of weird circumstances going around it.
Tennessee went 3 weeks in September without playing a football game. I mean, that's crazy.
That's what Florida does every year to start the season.
3 actual weeks, though, of no football because
Yeah.
of 9/11 moving things back. They already had the bye week built into the middle of September. So just very strange season overall in the way that
Right.
it ended in the regular season. What
Well,
were you
and
gonna
so
say?
this was the first time since 1994, 1995 that Tennessee hadn't had a bye week before they played Florida.
Great point.
Because they always took their bye week beforehand, and I think Florida did too. And I'm not. This is not a shot at Florida. This is just being factual. They always did this, and they haven't done it last year, I guess, but I feel like they still do most of the seasons. Is they open up with 2 just like absolute cupcakes and just demolish them in the swamp, and then they would go to play Tennessee. But Tennessee always had their bye week, which I always thought was really bizarre because that's so early in
kind of
the year.
psyched them out. Yeah.
Well, no, but I mean, like, then you got to play 9 straight games
True.
after that.
True.
So I think, like that was I thought an interesting little tidbit because it was something that we've talked about this before in the past. Like, this was for somebody that, like my team was not great at this time period, and when these 2 teams played, it was must see TV. It was like I think I have it like in my notes. Like, this is the 12th year. This was Spurrier's 12th year at Florida. All 12 years he was there. When they played Tennessee, they were both ranked in the top 15. 9 of the 12 years, they were both ranked in the top 10, and like 4 times they were both in the top 5. It was just an incredible rivalry.
A tremendous rivalry, but still at the same time, Tennessee in this game is searching for its first win at the Swamp in 30 years. And Florida is an 18-point favorite at home, which sounds crazy for a matchup of top 5 teams, but that's how much confidence there was with Florida. And we'll get to more of that later on and how that kind of shaped a lot of Florida fans' perception of this game and why it was such a deflating loss. Spoiler alert, Tennessee wins a thrilling game that I think that even watching it back, you really don't know throughout who's going to win this game because Florida had the 20 unanswered points in the second quarter, and it looks like Florida has got its feet under it, and then Tennessee just keeps coming back. And for Tennessee fans who have experienced so much pain in the 21st century post-national championship in 1998, this is one of the seminal moments that they will look back on and always say, like, man, that I'll always remember where I was that day and what that win meant for me.
Yeah. I mean, just probably wearing overalls somewhere in like the Smoky Mountains, but you speaking of that, like even before that, this was not like they had lost 8 out of the last 10 against Florida.
Right.
Like this was like I remember watching this game and obviously we'll get into it like more, but I remember like just the overall theme in my head or in my mind watching it was like, again they'd beaten Tennessee 8 out of 10 years in the past decade. They had won 4 of the last 5 by less than 6 points, but they always found a way to somehow win. It was and break their hearts doing it. So I loved watching this, and it just you just kind of kept thinking that was going to happen at some point, and it just didn't.
Let's start with the cast, the directors here. Rare in this day and age in the SEC do we see 2 coaches who A, have a national championship ring, and B, are facing off for the 9th time against each other. Spurrier versus Fulmer, Part 9. Spurrier had a 7-1 advantage on Fulmer. The 1998 Tennessee team that won a natty was the only other time that Fulmer actually beat Florida. He had never beaten him in the Swamp or anything like that, obviously. And ironically enough, Fulmer was on the Tennessee team as a guard the last time that Tennessee won in the Swamp in 1971. Right. So the year before this game is played, let's start with Fulmer real quick because there's a lot of Spurrier stuff that we can really dig into. They had declared September 9th in Knoxville Philip Fulmer Day, and that was before the Florida game. Not maybe the best idea because that's just material for Spurrier to kind of feed into.
At the time, he was 1-7.
An interesting move. I get it. Fulmer has won a national championship, all that. Interesting move to do it in the middle of the season.
Right.
Fulmer was 35-2 against the rest of the SEC East, but he was 2-7 against Florida coming into this one.
It was like clockwork. It was like absolute clockwork. It happened every single year. It was amazing. I tell you what, one other thing that I thought was cool about like their backgrounds, you don't see now. Like I feel like this was like such an old school SEC thing you just see all the time. Both of these coaches played for this like their universities.
Good point. Good
So
point.
and like you never see that. And also, this might just be having PTSD from this past week as a fan myself. Both coordinators had been there for over 5 years. The staffs, I know, right? It was Don the John, or was it John the Don Chavis?
Jan the Dan Chavis.
Jesus.
They hit some great booth shots in this where he looks unrecognizable now without that beard. I can't not see him with anything but that beard. But yeah, John the Don Chavis was definitely in the house because he's had an SEC job for the last 50 years.
Right.
It feels like. It's the thing about watching coaches face off with rings, I think, is something that we just don't like. We see it sometimes, but I think now, because of how few coaches, active coaches there are that actually have rings in recent memory, and you're not necessarily talking about a Mac Brown as one of those type of guys, but like the Saban versus Jimbo matchups, the Jimbo versus Dabo matchups, we've seen that in the last couple of years, and now we're going to see it all the time in the West because you've got three coaches in the SEC West who have rings, including Coach O.
But it's not the same feel.
It's kind of not. And this is a great rivalry in a sense because Spurrier fed into it. And Spurrier played this, he played the role of villain so well. And, he loved to jab Tennessee whenever he could. Obviously, he used to always say you can't spell citrus without UT because the second place team in the SEC used to go to the Citrus Bowl. He was at the Gator Bowl this past year, and that clip went viral because he was getting announced for the All Gator Bowl team. And he gets wildly booed because Tennessee is playing Indiana in this game. And Spurrier, as only Spurrier could do, decides in this moment he's going to chomp. He's going to do the Gator chomp because why wouldn't he? I mean, that's who he is through and through.
Well, and it's so weird too. And like I think this is I thought of this last night watching it, and like this is different, especially for you as somebody that didn't like grow up around it. But it was so kind of bizarre because every single year, like again, this was like clockwork. Like Spurrier had won 6 SEC championships since they started the game like in '92. Like this is like in a very short amount of time. Like he had dominated the SEC and the SEC East. But this was something that whoever won this game was almost like 100% going to win the conference. They were definitely going to win the division.
Yep.
But they were also most likely going to win the conference. And you look at it like Tennessee won in '97, '98. That's 2 of the years that Florida didn't. I'm pretty sure Florida won every other year besides that. But that was decided the 3rd week of the season. And the rest of the year, you're just kind of like, I mean.
Spurrier, to watch him on the sideline in this game, with no visor, by the way. I'm always a little bit weirded out now when I look back and I watch a Spurrier coach game without a visor. I'll have more on that subject a little bit later. But watching it through the lens of knowing that this is his last game, and you see the strain on his face kind of throughout this, and you see it early on because when Tennessee jumps out to that early lead, it's almost like a little bit of that wind is out of his sail, and Spurrier kind of realizes he's in for an absolute dogfight, and this isn't going to be one of those days where he's talking about hanging half 100 between the hedges or doing anything like that. I mean, this is a different kind of ball game. His offense, though, 20 years later, nearly 20 years later, to look back on it, seeing all the modern principles of it and little wrinkles, it's so fun to watch. He threw the ball 51 times.
First off, one of the parts that was like fantastic, like classic Spurrier, was he was so pissed because of the inefficiency of how Grossman was running the offense for most of the day. And at one point, you looked on the side, he didn't have his visor. He was just sitting standing in this like weird plie, legs crossed, like in a way that I don't know how you physically are able to do that. And it was like a power stance, but it was. I don't even know how to describe it. I hope you guys go back and watch it because it was one of the most awkward standing. Like I couldn't have been comfortable, and you could just tell he was just so defeated. Like, what in the hell are y'all doing?
Spurrier, this game though, it just, you can tell it just means so much to him, and he lives and dies with every single play, and watching his mannerisms on the sideline. I bet if this game were played in 2020, we'd have even more shots of him on the sideline and getting his live reactions. Like we're watching, to bring a modern context to this, we're watching Buzz Williams the other night coaching A&M
Right.
against Kentucky basketball, and you're seeing Buzz Williams every 2 seconds because he freaks out, and people get sick of watching him during a game, and people voice their frustrations with that on Twitter. But he is such electric material for a camera person to be able to cover. And that's how Spurrier kind of always is. It's how he was with the Orlando Apollos when he was in the Alliance of American Football.
Yeah, I mean, there was one part where Fulmer did his like just classic Fulmer moves, like both hands on like his player's shoulders. Like, now listen, man, like we're gonna be fine. We're gonna be fine, man. Like just like you're gonna shake it off. We're gonna need you the rest of the 60 minutes. Spurrier did like the exact opposite. It was like, what the hell are you doing, Rex? Like it couldn't have been. He was like peak disappointed parent. Just like, get out of my face, go to your room, don't want to talk to you.
Speaking of Rex, let's get into the A-listers. There are a ton of A-listers. I mean, a lot. There are guys that we're not even going to name because there was 8 first-team All-SEC selections combined in this. 5 from Florida, 3 from Tennessee. I'm not even going to list Dante Stallworth, Rashae Caldwell, or Lito Shepard. These guys who, in my opinion, like, had really, really good college careers, had really good NFL careers, but there are, I think, more interesting guys that we need to break down. And in my opinion, none more interesting than Sexy Rexy, Rex Grossman, who, by the way, got that nickname from Spurrier himself. Of course he did.
Of course he did. Grossman,
runner-up for the Heisman, was lost to Eric Crouch. Looking back on it, it's just nuts. Eric Crouch had one of the worst Heisman seasons ever, and I realized that he's playing for a Nebraska team that went to the national championship. It's
don't
Nebraska. No. I'm saying for anybody that's going to defend him, because Rex Grossman should have won the Heisman this year. Like there's no doubt about it.
So first off, Eric Crouch. That's the only team I've ever like. People like rag on like Bama or other teams that like sneak into like a national championship or the playoff. Like if they didn't win their conference, whatever. They lost by like 36 points to an unranked Colorado team.
That's
their last game of the season, and then still went to the national championship, and I think lost by more.
Against Miami, yeah.
Yeah, like they were not like a great team to watch. Which obviously like there was so much on the line for this game because of that. But yeah, I think he should have won. He probably should have won the Heisman. There were some other people on this. Like I forgot how. Like Chris Leak, I thought he threw like the best ball out of any quarterback I've probably watched in the SEC in like the last 15 years. It's just like a perfect spiral every time. I felt like that with Grossman because it was like this effortless, just beautiful spiral. It was always pretty accurate, but it also was like there was like a not even a hint, like more than a hint of like laziness to it. Like it was just not good, like a minimal effort. It, like just for as long as I can get away with it, just kind of slinging it sidearm and throwing off his back foot constantly.
Rex did this thing where I'm glad you brought up the back foot thing because as a Bears fan, I have PTSD of watching Rex Grossman throw off his back foot in the NFL way, way too much. And in college, he did this thing that's almost like Doug Flutie used to do, where he would take this deep drop step with his back foot when he was trying to set his foot. And like he was almost stretching it as far as he could because he wanted to get as far back as possible because his arm angle sucked. I mean, it absolutely sucked. Like his arm would just be so low, and you wonder how that guy was able to get his throw above the line of scrimmage so much. But he had this arm that was killer. And watching it back and seeing some of the throws that he made, like he made that throw. He made this throw at Caldwell. Oh my God.
Jesus.
Like one of the best college throws I have ever seen that he just dropped in a bucket for him.
That's not an exaggeration either. Like that was one of the.
It was perfect.
Like from one hash to the other side of the field. It's especially like they were down 14, but just puts it perfectly on the outside shoulder. It was beautiful.
I've been trying to figure out Rex Grossman for so long because. I know, and it's probably useless, and I think I've finally figured it out because we talk about the arm, and he did all these great things. You know, he had the NCAA record for 55 touchdown passes through his sophomore year. I mean, probably should have left for the NFL after his redshirt sophomore year this year, and it's amazing to kind of think that he didn't. But I've been trying to figure out for so long why Rex Grossman got to the level that he was at with the mechanics that he had, which just were just really, really tough to watch looking back. And there are things that he was able to overcome, but he was this guy who, okay, everybody knows this person that is, what's a nice 2020 way to say this? This person's a little chunk. I'm not
lazy
fat
but
shaming.
talented.
lazy but crazy talented. You just stick them out there and you watch what they're able to do.
He's like a dad bod.
Yeah, he had a dad bod. I would say at any point of his college or NFL career, I could maybe lift with Rex Grossman. I feel confident about that. I don't know why you
felt the need to bring that up.
I had because perspective.
Maybe so. I think he is definitely one of those guys that like, and I played with like a lot of people like this where if you don't have to lift or you don't have to run or you don't have to, like, if you can still be as talented as he was and not have to put in a lot of effort, like, yeah, you're just going to do that.
You just are. And I get, so from that perspective, I get it. And he would have, in the NFL, you know, the big moment and the big, like, peak of his career was, of course, that 2006 season with the Bears where they went to the Super Bowl, lost to the Colts. Still a little too soon to talk about that. I remember this one day, I mean, everybody in Chicago knew there was good Rex and bad Rex, and it was mostly bad Rex. But that defense was just at a different level. They also had Devin Hester returning kicks and punts for touchdowns every other play. So the back foot thing that we all knew and came to expect, there was this one day I remember so specifically where my family and we took our family Christmas tree photo with snow on the outside. We're all wearing Bears jerseys. Everybody's all in on the Bears that year. And I remember thinking that day, just for the love of God, let Rex Grossman be average this day, and maybe the Bears will win. Rex Grossman this day against the Vikings was 6 of 19 for 34 yards with 3 interceptions, and the Bears won by double digits. And that is Rex Grossman. They won by double digits? They won by double digits. They won 23-13 that day.
There are a lot of flaws. Like, he led the SEC in interceptions. Like, he also led the SEC in touchdowns. And he had, I mean, like, this offense, like, it was kind of like maddening to watch because it was like, man, imagine if you actually tried. And I don't know Rex Grossman, so I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it was like, you know, he had so much talent around him. And this is also, I don't care how this sounds, this was like as much of like the last days of like the SEC recruiting of the Wild Wild West, where a lot of the guys, like for like some of the premier players in the, like, not just in Florida or Tennessee, like in the entire conference, I don't know if they're getting into you know, current day admission standards. I'll just say it. Like, I mean, they just,
Rex was not a guy who went to class. That was widely known. Yeah.
There was a book that came out like called like I think it was like A Year in the SEC or like Welcome to the SEC, like a year or two before this game, and they had anonymous quotes and stuff like that from every single coach, but you pretty much knew who each coach was, and it was just like openly talking about all the cheating that was going on at each place. It was crazy. Gosh. So he had a lot of talent around him, but that offense, like, they put up over 400 yards passing a game.
He went to the perfect place. He really did.
Yeah. They had I mean, we'll talk about it in a second, but like Rashae Caldwell, Jabar Gaffney, like they each had 1,000 yards that year, each had 10 plus touchdowns. But like having, like, we always think of Spurrier offense being like probably the best or one of the best, like in the conference at least, if not the country. They were a top 5 scoring offense, top 5 total offense, also top 5 in defense though.
Yeah, number 6 run defense in the country that year as well. And it makes sense now looking back of why Rex, who was, I mean, he was Mr. Football in the state of Indiana. He went to Bloomington South High School. Yeah. He went to Indiana High School.
Him and 4 other people?
Indiana high school football is actually not as bad as you would think. There are some pretty solid prospects that have come out of the area, but he was a big deal at the time, and it kind of makes sense, like looking back, of why he would want to go play with Spurrier, because Rex, a lot of Bears fans later would say, and this came out, I think, while he was in the NFL, there was this phrase that described Sexy Rexy, and it was, F it, I'm going deep. Every single time. And that was, I think, who was it? The Susie Colbert website that came up with that and did like a blog post about it. Really, really funny to look back on. Rex Grossman, who also was nicknamed Sex Cannon.
Wow, that's a
fun little tidbit.
Goals, man. Good
Rex.
for him.
We've got
There's
more.
nothing about him that oozes sex appeal, so I'm very uncomfortable with that.
We've got more Rex Grossman stuff a little bit later as well. Alex Brown, speaking of Gators who went to the Chicago Bears and had a little cup of coffee on that 2016. Is that why you wanted to do this game? No. I actually didn't realize there was as much Bears talent. We're not even going to get to Ian Scott, who was also on the Bears on that 2016 team as well. Alex Brown, SEC Defensive Player of the Year, basically came back to college to be able to play for a national championship and had 13 sacks in 2001, was really good, rare 3-time first-team All-SEC guy.
First-team All-American for 2 out of 3 years, and was a second-team All-American his junior year.
Incredible college player, and looked really, really cut. Looking back, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, he was jacked. He
was yoked.
He had 3 blocked field goals this season. In the 2001 season, he blocked 3 field goals himself.
Alex Brown had, in this game 2 years ago against Tennessee, he dominated. I mean, he had 5 sacks and an interception and a forced fumble, and he apparently he knew the calls. And he got tipped off of what the snap count was going to be. And so Tennessee coaches said, no matter what we do in this game, we need to make sure that Alex Brown doesn't know our snap count. And so that was something. I mean, he was contained relatively speaking in this game, but still, a guy who had a great college career was such a focal point for Tennessee to try and shut him down. I actually remember when he was having success with the Bears, I waited 2 hours in line at a car dealership to be able to meet him. Super, super nice guy. Saw him 5 years later when he was doing some stuff with I think it was Comcast Sportsnet in Chicago, and I waited and I was doing a job shadow that day and got to talk with him a little bit then. Super, super nice dude. Not a bad thing to say about Alex Brown, but in this game, I thought relatively quiet.
I mean, he had first off, that Tennessee offensive line was fantastic, and they also
so good.
He
this
had
game.
13 the biggest most mystifying thing for me with Alex Brown is because I remember he had the game with 5 sacks the week before they played Bama in '99, and that's all they talked about the entire broadcast, and also Bama won, but it was pretty awesome. But I remember that because that's what he only had 7.5 the whole year. That is what made him an All-American was that game.
Yes, exactly.
It's one of those things too where it's like the David Pollock thing when he had the strip sack for South Carolina, and I don't think that was I think that was his sophomore year. That's what kind of burst onto the scene and cemented his place, and especially with this rivalry. So yeah, the 13 sacks his senior year. I don't think out of all the times we've done this, I've never been more confused than I am right now. How in the hell did he slip to the 4th round of the NFL draft? Did something happen?
Because I don't know, because maybe he was considered a little bit undersized at the time, and that's why he put on weight.
3-time All-American.
I know, 3-time All-American in the SEC. Meanwhile, Rex looks like he's never worked out a day in his life and is somehow a first-round quarterback with those arm angles. I don't know how that happens, but that is kind of weird to look back on, because somebody that accomplished, you would think he'd be ready to go. Maybe there were some medical red flags or something like that. I don't know. Jabar Gaffney, the Florida receiver who was, I think it's fair to call him the go-to target for Rex Grossman. Yeah. Like Alex Brown.
Grossman to Gaffney.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Brown made a key play in a win against Tennessee. They showed the replay of it. I didn't realize this, like I said, not growing up in this, I didn't know that a game was decided on this, but
it was a big deal.
The game-winning touchdown catch with 14 seconds left to beat Tennessee in 2000.
In Knoxville.
They called it a touchdown. And watching the replay, there's just no way. I mean, it's an incomplete pass through and through. There was no replay to be able to overturn it. Spurrier himself said after the game, God smiled down on the Gators that day. He's right.
He made the call like he had money on the line, because he's like, it's a touchdown, and then just walked away from everyone. It was
terrible.
So bad. So really bad. I loved it. I loved every second of it, because it was a very gross, rainy day in Knoxville. I remember watching that game. Gaffney, I thought was they made all these comparisons to this group of receivers, these 3 guys, which is was it Taylor Jackson was the other one?
Taylor Jacobs was the other one.
Taylor Jacobs.
Yeah.
So I mean, Caldwell and Gaffney. You look at receiving duos in SEC history. That's a top 5 hands down. And Grossman to Gaffney, that combination was one of the most prolific. I think that's one of the most prolific duos in SEC football history. And I'm not just trying to say because we watched this one game, but that entire season, it seems like I was shocked he only had 13 touchdowns.
The nickname was incredible too. They called him the Reaper. God. Because I take they souls, according to Jabar Gaffney. Great line.
Pre-game interview, that was uncomfortable.
The pre-game thing with our guy, Tony Barnhart, was actually, it made the College Game Day thing. If you go back and watch this game on YouTube, they included some clips talking about this game, and that was one of the things that they talked about. They had nicknames for all 3 of those guys, and they compared them to the 96 trio, Ike Hilliard, Riedel Anthony, Jacquez Green. And the amazing...
They were better.
What's that? Yeah,
Just
they were.
So we're clear, they were better.
Yeah, they ended up, their legacy, I think, is going to hold up a little bit better. Weird to think that he actually was voted team MVP of this great team that had, Grossman and Alex Brown. Only Florida receiver to ever have multiple 1,000-yard
That was
receiving
pretty
seasons.
interesting.
Not that surprising, though, because we forget how much passing has changed. The amount of games in a season has changed a lot, too. I mean, look at LSU. LSU played 15 games this past year. If you win a national championship, that's the standard. Your receiver numbers are going to be elevated a bit. But yeah.
Like Ron Zook is a head coach and Will Muschamp, so it's like, what are you going to do with that?
Ron Zook. Oh, the Zooker. Spurrier actually kicked Jabar Gaffney off the team back in 1999. Yeah. Brought him back. Kind of a guy who had a lot of trouble after he retired in the NFL. I think people might forget this. This was a couple years ago. He was accused of pouring sugar in Lito Shepherd's car, who is his cousin, was on this Florida team, was his teammate in the NFL. He and his girlfriend were accused of doing that. The charges were eventually dropped, but
it's a nice bonding experience. It's a fun date night.
Who does that to their cousin, or who even gets accused of doing that? I don't know.
Oh, I would definitely do it to my cousins. I think like this. I'm not saying this is not like being judgmental of him. I'm just like, this was a thing in the times, and I can tell you several examples from Bama even. So it's not me trying to be biased. This was a time where you didn't have to take the SAT, you didn't have to go to class, you didn't have to these were just straight up legit and some of the best athletes in the country and incredible football players. And it was kind of this lawless time. You didn't have to do all these things you have to do now. He was awesome.
He was very good. He was very good in this game. Let's get to the Tennessee guys. The defensive tackles alone.
Okay, hold on. First off, let me dive in here because we didn't even say anything about Randy Shannon. What happened to Randy Shannon?
Randy Shannon's the defensive coordinator for UCF.
No, he was an offensive coordinator. He's the offensive coordinator.
No, defensive coordinator for UCF right now.
No, Randy Shannon. No, I'm thinking Randy. His name's Randy Shannon. He was the offensive coordinator for Tennessee. Same name.
Oh, we're talking about a different Randy Shannon. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now that makes more sense.
This one is a white. So he has it's from The Hangover. So he basically he was a pretty good offensive coordinator. I don't remember Tennessee necessarily leading the country in any stats, but they always had a good offense, and he was the offensive coordinator forever at Tennessee. He was just like Chavis. So the other people I put him on the A list. You probably don't remember these people, but Marquand Manuel ended up having a pretty not a great NFL career, but he was the defensive coordinator for the Falcons.
Okay.
2 years ago. Like you said, Lito Shepherd, Keywan Ratliff. Travis Carroll, he was one of my favorite players. He actually started at Bama and then transferred. He was a kid from the Bowles School, which was IMG before IMG.
Okay. That's
where Chipper Jones went. So I'll hold off on all my other players. But the Tennessee ones I thought were interesting because this game was there was besides Henderson and Haynesworth, you're going to mention, all the people that we thought were going to be the A-listers, especially in this game, and they even mentioned on the broadcast, ended up not having a huge impact on the game.
Yes.
Kelly Washington, and looking back on it, I remember Kelly Washington being a big deal because he was one of those first guys that did the Winky thing where he had a minor league baseball career, then came in at 23, to play college football, and he was 6'4", 220. He was a big physical guy. But looking back on his stats, he had 1,000 yards receiving, but he only had 2 games over 100 yards.
Yeah, he and Dante Stallworth, they kept bringing up on the broadcast, they're these guys are the key to the game. If they're going to be able to win this, it's going to depend on those guys. And those guys were really quiet in this game because, as we'll get to him in a minute here, Travis Stevens was really, really good. The defensive tackles, Albert Haynesworth, that's the big one. Did not get a lot of mention in this game.
Henderson was the big one.
Yeah, Henderson also, Henderson was the better college player. Yeah. And ultimately you can make the argument that he was the better NFL player, though he was not as rich as Albert Haynesworth came to be. Haynesworth, All-SEC second team in 2001. He was just dominant against the run. That was his thing. I think you could argue he became more of an A-lister when he got to the NFL. And
he had a $100 million contract.
Unfortunately, that was one of the things that he was infamous for. He had the stomping incident with the Titans. That was a 5-game suspension.
He did that on campus at Tennessee. He flat out dropped just another student in a pickup basketball game.
Can't do that. Speaking of basketball games, This is the same guy who a couple years ago got kicked out of his son's basketball game. Why? Yeah. Because he got into a fight with his son. So Albert Hainsworth, who actually right now
his son?
Yeah, got into a fight with his son. That story went
during the game. Oh man!
Before the game. Game hadn't started yet. No, game had not started yet, and they got into a fight in the hallway, and he had to be taken out by security. All that stuff. We had that story on SDS, but it was odd. And now we find out that he's actually in need of a kidney donor, and he's fighting for his life right now. Sports Illustrated wrote a great piece about it. But Albert Hainsworth is one of those guys that like you look back on, and you're like, oh wait, You question how somebody like him got to that level where he's getting a $100 million contract. Let's just say that.
I mean, he was a really good player. Him and John Henderson was one of the best defensive linemen I've watched in the SEC since I've been watching football.
He was dominant.
So dominant. He's so big. He was there forever. Like he was one of those guys. He actually came back like specifically for this game, trying to win a national championship. Also famous for when Tennessee was under investigation for illegal or impermissible benefits. He had 4 separate, wireless or wire transfers from like a Western Union for $5,500 a piece.
Standard.
Nothing ever came of it, but that's neither here nor there. Just I would like to bring that up again. So him and Hainsworth, flat out, that's a cheat code in the middle.
Not fair to be able to have that. Yeah.
And you can see like the first drive of the game, like there's a 3rd and 1, and it's just stuffed. Like I don't know who would want to try to like run into the teeth of that?
They didn't. Florida ultimately did not want to run in this game, part of which be because they didn't have Ernest Graham healthy. But Spurrier essentially said, you know what, that's why we're going to throw the ball 50 times with Grossman, because we don't want to run at the teeth of this defense. John Henderson, even though they decided not to run the ball up the gut, he made his presence felt. I mean, he had 2 batted passes on Grossman's low arm angles, and there was a couple times where he destroyed Grossman. I mean, we're falling on him the weight of what that looked like. Grossman had to just be seeing stars after both of the hits that Henderson put on him.
He's like 6'7", 320 or something like that.
Neck roll. I love the neck roll too.
Always had a neck roll. And this is like, who was the guy that used to play for was it Gilbert Brown? Was that his name? The nose
huge for the Packers.
Yeah. So like that was like more, I think, like synonymous with like that position at that time. Like it was just like big, huge, like run stoppers, just trying to like plug the middle.
Yep.
John Henderson looked like he had like an ounce of fat on him.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. Also, just side note, Rex Grossman should have had at least 9 turnovers in this game.
Yes. The low arm angles, I'm surprised that Henderson was the only one who, I guess there were other guys in Tennessee that sort of took advantage of this, but it looked like if you just got a paw up, you were going to be able to block a Rex Grossman pass every single time. Outland Trophy winner as the top interior lineman in 2000, so he was very, very well known. Big part of the broadcast as well. Actually had a pretty solid 10-year NFL career too.
Yeah, he was really good.
Made him some money in the NFL, not Hainsworth money, but money nonetheless. The star of this game, though, Travis Stevens, the Tennessee tailback who first team All-SEC running back. Interesting story too, because he actually took a red shirt. Yeah, took a red shirt in 1999. He wanted to wait behind Travis Henry, Jamal Lewis. Interesting off-the-field stuff.
Well, he didn't want
those guys. Well, he wanted to be able to get his time at Tennessee, and instead of transferring, and ultimately said, "I'll take a red shirt in 1999." He was a 5th-year senior when this game was played.
Right.
Dominated this game. Absolutely dominated this game. 19 carries, 226 yards, 2 touchdowns. He just gashed Florida.
They wanted no part. They wanted no part of tackling him all day long. And he wasn't even like a super big back,
but he ran through guys.
They wanted no part of if he got through, because like Will Bartholomew was their fullback that like, and I swear to God, I'm not just saying this. There was at least 300 run pros on this Tennessee team, and 2 of them were on the offensive line. Like there was, I remember like I can't think of the name now. Fred Weary, and then whoever the other, Will Copeland, I think was like the offensive lineman, and then Will Bartholomew. They would just open up these massive holes, and if he got through with like a full head of steam, he was falling forward at least, or probably just running right by you.
He was so good in this game, and we'll dig into. He falls into another category that we'll discuss later on. But you look at the workload that he had, and he had 19 carries in this game. In the first 6 games of 2001, he had 169 carries. That workload looked like, if you just kind of break down the numbers,
28 carries a game.
28 carries a game that breaks down to. and you look at the way that he actually didn't get as much work towards the end of that year, and you're like, did he just kind of run out of gas? Is that why they sort of dialed it back? But this game, there was nothing about what he did that said he ran out of gas. He just gashed Florida left and right, inside, outside. Did not matter. And the holes that he was being given, he got to the next level, and he would just blow people up. He was so fun to watch in this game.
And Tennessee also had the luxury, and they still do every single season, of having that November schedule where they only play Kentucky and Vandy.
Yep.
And they used to play Memphis. I look at the schedule. They played Notre Dame, which was like, oh, shout out to Tennessee for playing a good non-conference schedule like the middle of the season. They were 5-6 that year under Bob Davies. But Stevens, so I thought the most interesting part of this was, one, the story in general is incredible. Like taking the red shirt, like you would never see this nowadays.
Third year of his college career, and he takes a red shirt. That's weird.
In his freshman year, he had like he had like 60 yards in the SEC championship game. He was a very big part of that game. So he takes a backseat to them, and then he has like his dad passes away that year, like while he's in the red shirt. It's like, so it's just like incredible story. But what was more, I think like what made it even better, and this is like the background stuff, I got my old Forrest Davis recruiting magazines out, of course.
Boy.
So two of the 2000 issue and the 2001 issue, the number one overall player in the Southeast, they were both featured in this game. Jabar Davis, Brock Berlin. Brock Berlin wasn't featured in the game, but they were both on the roster.
Jabar Davis, Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Stone Mountain from Tucker High School. So, they compared him to Earl Campbell and said he was as complete of a back as possible. So it was the ultimate weapon. So anyway, like the Tennessee, again, I'm not accusing them of cheating, but they definitely did, because we all did at this time in the SEC. Tennessee had the number one recruiting class in the country for 2 years in a row, 99 and 2000. And they signed several 5-stars, but this year specifically, what makes the story so great, they signed 3 5-star running backs in this class alone. 3. 3 in just this class. I mean, it's just like, it was... the Travis Stevens thing, I always mixed him up with Travis Henry, and I'm pretty sure there was another one too that was like a similar name. Like that was like the Cam with a K thing at Auburn.
Travis.
Everyone was just Travis at Tennessee, but they were a very, very talented team. But I thought that was pretty special. That was the one part of Tennessee that I didn't hate.
Was the Travis Stevens story?
Yeah, let me know when you want me to talk about Casey Clausen, because I'll go off.
Do you want to talk? Casey Clausen's weird because he doesn't fit into an A-lister, in my opinion, just because at this point in his career,
Connor, you're right.
He doesn't, and he doesn't fit into the breakout performer. He's not really a prominent extra. He's kind of in this murky ground, so this isn't necessally part of one of those categories.
The most average.
Go off about Casey Clausen.
I hated Casey Clausen so much, and one, I didn't like any of the Clausens. I do feel bad for Rick having to be in the middle between Casey and Jimmy. I don't know how. So Casey Clausen was somehow a 5-star quarterback. And I always hated him because his first start was against Bama, and of course they won. And he, I think he took the job from this kid named A.J. Suggs, who was from Keatron High School. He was also another huge recruit in the Southeast. So this kid, Casey Clausen's from California, and for whatever reason, Tennessee, raided California every single year. It never made sense to me, because if you, they had, I looked at it yesterday, their all-time recruits, the list of them, the state where they have the 4th most players from their all-time recruits, California.
Makes sense.
No, it doesn't.
It makes perfect sense.
If you live in
because
California, why are you trying to go to Knoxville? Yeah, sure. Anyway, Philip Fulmer, I'm pretty sure, has never been to California on purpose outside of recruiting. But they had this they had this pipeline of people coming in. They had Anthony Munoz or Michael Munoz, which was one of the greatest offensive linemen in NFL history. Anthony Munoz, his son. I hated Casey Clausen from the get-go, just absolutely from the get-go. And then I told you the story. The week after this game, I went to SEC Fanfare, and we were playing this 3-on-3 thing, and one of the kids on our team was this goofy-looking kid with this spiked-up, gelled blonde hair and braces.
I was waiting for you to bring that up.
He's
a big
Jimmy
Frosted
Clausen.
Tip
I was
guy.
like, this kid sucks. This is he looked just like Casey Clausen. Always had this weird, confused underbite look for whatever reason. Everything about him bothered me. And it was mainly because he was so, inefficiently efficient, if that makes sense.
I actually really get that. I really get that watching this.
He had, because I know, you talked to Michael Wayne Brett, and he brought up the fact that he was 14-1 on the road. And he's somebody brought up Casey Clausen today on SEC this morning when I was listening to it. Like he's a known name. Like he's a household name, I think, in a lot of SEC fans. He couldn't have been more just average. For like I think he had 9 interceptions this season. 6 of them were against ranked teams. I hated everything about him. Everything.
But he always made that one play. That one play that, if you're looking at a make or break point of the game, he just, for whatever reason, was able to benefit from that. And it wasn't necessarily always.
And it was always over the middle.
Play.
It was always over the middle, and it was always on like 3rd and 12.
Yeah, because he was undrafted coming out of college too. Which if you start that much. I mean, the arm strength was clearly lacking, and he had weapons around him, but he was not in this. Like you looked at him and Rex Grossman, you're like, all right, this is different. I can tell the talent is just at a different level with Rex Grossman, despite the fact that Casey Clausen physically was probably built a little bit better for the next level and to be able to do some things.
5-star.
Yeah, I mean, but he at the same time, like it was clear that they were not going to put the game into his hands. He had 2 interceptions in this game too.
He never once, I'm sure I'm wrong about this, but I don't feel like it's that far from the truth. I don't think he ever once threw a spiral in his entire collegiate career.
Maybe that's just a Tennessee thing, because Peyton Manning was not a spiral guy. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, I don't even put them in the same breath. It's the worst.
I only had one breakout performer in this game, and I don't even know if he really qualifies. Bobby Graham, the Tennessee receiver, he was a junior.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, all right, that's fine. I mean, he was a junior. He doesn't fit the Alshon Jeffrey 2010 against Bama breakout performer
Why would
type.
you bring that up?
Sorry, I had to because that's the primary example when I think of this category of a guy who just kind of bursts onto the scene, and you say, "Oh, people around here know how good he is."
Jeffrey?
No, on the broadcast of that game, they said people around South Carolina know how good this kid is. This is the type of game that's going to make America know how good he is. There was nobody that really fit
happened
that bill.
for Bobby Graham.
Right.
He had like 7, but he did have 7 catches for 71 yards. And I think that was important because he had like, I think that doubled his it was more than double any amount of receptions he'd had in a single game all season, and it was way more yards than he had in a single game all season, in which they needed it too because like you said, Stallworth was quiet. He had a really good year, like statistically. I think he had like 10 or 11 touchdowns too, but Stallworth and Kelly Washington, and there's actually a point. I'll bring it up to my coldest take, but he had to step up, I think, because like they didn't have a single catch after like the 10-minute mark in the third quarter.
Yeah, Bobby Graham was the passing offense for this team. He was the move that changed guys when they weren't getting some sort of big play from Travis Stevens.
Also, Robert Gillespie.
Yes.
From Florida. He had like, he didn't run the ball very well because they didn't
want to
at all. But he had like 19 total touches and had 10 receptions, which was like a career high and or a season high, and like 76 yards too, which was also a season high.
Yeah, kind of a breakout performer because of the not having Ernest Graham in this game and how significant. You could argue it was significant for Florida for the way that because they weren't able to have any sort of balance at all. I'm not sure, like we said, I'm not sure if they were going to want to run at that dominant Tennessee defensive tackle duo, but at the same time, they were just so limited. Like there was one point where Florida was inside the 5, and they tried to run the ball with Gillespie, and he just got smashed. And they said on the broadcast, I think it was Todd Blackledge said on the broadcast, yeah, that's kind of what he's not really good at. And then they just ran some sort of
scatback.
Yeah, they just ran some sort of like bootleg with Grossman, and he had a sink on the next play. It's like, this is
what was
really
weird
part of the
too
game.
about it was just, and we'll talk about it during the actual gameplay, but. This, like, I remember the name Ernest Graham. I don't know if he was like that dominant of a running back that it would have made a big difference. Because you're looking at their offense, again, they average like 409 yards passing a game, and they average about 120 yards rushing too. But like their offense was through the air, so like I don't know if that would have made a huge difference. But I will say, like the fact that like if you're trying to like their offense looks so. Like night and day. Like it was like every time they got to a 3rd and 1, like pretty much every single play, like during Grossman's entire career, I just remember him. I don't remember if it was in shotgun or not, but just him dropping back, like you said, like it's 11-step drop, throwing off his back foot, and finding probably Gaffney or Caldwell somewhere like wide open. But this was like anytime they got to 3rd and 1, it was like under center, like it wasn't I formation, it was like a single back, but they just would run up the gut. And I was like, what do y'all do? Like this isn't Spurrier offense. Like what are y'all doing?
Yeah, I don't know if that limited them at all, but I think it definitely kind of changed the way that Spurrier was going to call that game. At least tweaked it a little bit. The prominent extras, there's only two, and they're both tight ends, in my opinion.
Oh, God.
Ben Troop, the Florida tight end, was quiet in this game. I put him in this category because he was an All-American in 2003. He was a second-round pick in 2004. Was quiet. I think he was only mentioned on the broadcast once or twice, maybe, and I think it was mostly for blocking. Yeah, this was not a game in which he really was featured prominently. But the most obvious prominent extra is Jason Witten. Number one, Jason Witten, which Adam Spencer pointed this out.
Yeah, you didn't know that.
Yeah, why is the number so big? The fonts that Tennessee used on those uniforms were terrible. It was awful.
No matter what your last name was, it just had to take up a certain amount of space. So like Terry Fair was a cornerback there, and his name was it was like a billboard. It was ridiculous. I have no idea. And like the number one thing, I didn't really think much of that because they had a lot of guys that were ranked number one. I'm trying to think of the linebacker that was like, it's not Leonard Little. Was that the guy from Nebraska?
Oh, no, you're going to test me on that one. Yeah, I don't know.
So they had a number one as a linebacker who played in the 98 season with Al Wilson, who was just like an absolute monster. So I wasn't like that blown away by that, but he was awful in this game. He was awful.
Jason Witten was the GOAT, and not the good kind of GOAT, the bad kind of GOAT in this game. And if you had asked me watching this game, who's going to be the guy that's actually still playing in the NFL of all these people in this game? Jason Witten is not the guy that I would have chosen because he had this fumble on the sideline where they threw him on the hash, like outside the hash twice, and they threw this play to him where it looks like he's kind of trying to get out of balance a little bit, and Gus Scott just stripped it. And it was this huge play at the time because they were up in this game. They had all sorts of momentum, and then it just totally took it away. And then they throw him another play again in the flank, hits him in the shoulder pads. He tried to catch it in the shoulder pads, and it's picked off by Florida. And on the very next play after that, Grossman threw a go-ahead TD pass, and then later he actually dropped another potential touchdown catch from Casey Clausen. Like, Jason Witten was terrible in this game. Awful.
He had, all I remember from Jason Witten in college, because I never thought he was going to be that good, was he just had like this bright red rosacea cheeks, who always seemed like he was nervous no matter how good he was. And there was never like a run after the catch with Jason Witten. I felt like, I don't even know if, like, I didn't watch him enough in the pros, but I feel like his run after the catch was like how I would go like attack, like trying to go into like a movie theater row after like, the previews have started. Like, I'm just like very cautiously taking these like little baby steps, like, or like I'm like tiptoeing into the deep end of a pool. That's exactly how he's like. That's how he approached like a run after the catch.
He was only a sophomore. He was only a sophomore at the time, and obviously he had much better moments ahead. But I bet if you went back and asked Jason Witten, like, hey, worst moment of your entire football career, this had to be up there because he was just such a vastly different player. And I had Tennessee fans when I tweeted out a picture of his jersey because it's so weird for me to look at him as number one, and people were like, yeah, Witten was historically bad that day. If Tennessee was going to lose and if there was going to be somebody to blame afterwards, it would have been Jason Witten for sure. All right. Before we get to the story arc, we have a lot of different things that we're going to dig into. Let's quickly take a break and talk about the Saturday Down South podcast. That's the name of what we do, right? Let's take a quick break. Are you subscribed yet to the Saturday Down South podcast? Because if you're not, you absolutely should be. Maybe you're one of those people that when you go for a long car ride or you go on a plane and you think, I'm just going to kind of pick and choose whatever podcasts I want to listen to. And maybe you actually saw this episode of It Just Meant More and you thought to yourself, man, I should go download that. You know what you should also do while you're here is just subscribe, because we're going to continue to provide all sorts of It Just Meant More games throughout the entire offseason, and you don't want to miss any of them. And you actually don't want to miss any of our weekly podcasts as well. So if you are not already subscribed to the Saturday Down South podcast, make sure you just hit that little subscribe button right now. Give us a nice little 5-star review on iTunes, and Uncle Chris and Connor would greatly appreciate it. All right, let's get back to the podcast. Let's dig into the actual game itself. The favorite line from the broadcast. This being a Vern Lundquist game always provides some sort of gems, but I feel like without Gary Danielson, there's not as many of those cringe-worthy lines. I didn't realize this, I had to look this up, that Gary Danielson actually didn't come to CBS until 2006.
Oh yeah, this is the OG. This was, Jill Arrington on the sidelines. It was actually
Yeah.
Michelle Tafoya before that, I think. Right, she was after.
Todd Blackledge was on the call with Vern, so he kind of balances him out a little bit, where I feel like Gary just sort of adds to Vern being Vern.
Well, and they had Blackledge and Sean McDonough before Vern came on. Like Vern,
I love Sean McDonough.
Vern
He's
wasn't
so
even
good.
he was not as fun as Vern, like in any way.
Well, Vern's in a category by himself for fun, and you don't necessarily say that he's the greatest of all time in terms of the way that he breaks some of the things down, but you are entertained listening to Vern the entire time. And keep in mind, this is 20 years ago, so this is before we could really talk about gambling and stuff, but this was a line that stood out to me. So right after Tennessee goes up 14-0 in this game, Vern makes this reference to Tennessee being 18-point underdogs. I think they might have officially been 17.5, whatever it was. They were significant underdogs, 3-score underdogs. And so Vern says on the broadcast, Phil Fulmer told us yesterday, my guys are kind of angry about that. Yeah, so when coaches say that they don't care about the spreads or anything like that, they all do. They all know the spreads. And when you're an 18-point underdog as a top 5 team, word's going to get around a little bit. That stood out to me.
I'm never going to defend Tennessee, especially at this time in my life, and I want to go about like this entire episode like in the same mindset and voice as I was then, and just I want to be like pure. This is a team that barely beat Kentucky and gave up like 500 yards of offense to Kentucky 2 weeks prior. So I did think it was interesting that Florida was, because we've seen stuff like this before. It usually never works out for the favorite like that. If you're that much of a favorite and it's a top 5 matchup, I think Bama was a 17-point favorite for the kick 6. Also this season, even better example, both losses that Florida had like in 2001, they were a 3-score favorite because they were a 21 or 20-point favorite against Auburn on the road.
The odds makers had to just be scratching their head as for what to do about Spurrier. And I bet some people made really, really good money betting on Florida in those like early to mid 90s games where they couldn't figure out these high scoring offenses yet.
The overs are probably like at 40 and they were covering that like that. There was a stat they were saying, because like again, they had a top 5 scoring offense in the country. I think their scoring offense was 2nd or 3rd, and a top 5 scoring defense. So they were scoring an average of like 43 points or 44 points a game and only giving up like 13. Like they were a legit team, but they would just come at you in like just like waves where they had a couple of slow starts at the season, like it's like South Carolina, and they would just pour it on like out of nowhere, and they would kill teams. And so I think the stuff with Spurrier, I think like I'm sure he made a lot of people like a lot of money for this. They had a stat that Rex Grossman had more yards passing on the season in the first half of games than Joey Harrington and Ken Dorsey had for the whole season.
Joey Heisman, people forget they called him that.
That was ridiculous. That was my least favorite comment.
Yeah. Did you have a favorite line from the broadcast?
Yeah, so I had 2. The Aflac Duck apparently had just come out.
They love that. They flipped out with that.
It was like, if you don't watch the game, just watch this one part, because again, Vern isn't like a fan favorite yet. He's just being himself, and they come back and they're doing like the Aflac trivia question, and he could not have been more, I hate to say this word, but this is the best way to describe it, tickled about this damn duck. Like it was like, no, the duck is like on the blimp, I guess, and he's like, that squirrel can water ski. Like it's exactly what it was like. And then he just couldn't stop laughing at this stupid duck. And it was like a genuine laugh. So that was fun. Think about a better time. We were all just so young and innocent. My favorite quote out of my spitefulness is 56 seconds left in the game. Tennessee's going to win. All my nightmares are coming true because they should probably beat LSU the next week. I think they were a 14-point favorite the next week or something like that, I think.
But Tennessee ultimately lost next week to LSU, which we'll dig into more.
There's 3 Tennessee players on the sideline, and of course the one who's the loudest is the one that played the least in the game.
Oh, I know what you're saying.
It was number 95. His name's Demetrian Veal. He yells, "We smell the roses, baby. We smell the roses." And as soon as he said it, Vern Lundquist, just in the ultimate foreshadowing, said, "Sometimes you got to be careful with the live mics." And Tennessee went on to lose to LSU the following week and did not play for a national championship.
So that feeds into the next one, the coldest take from the broadcast. That in itself is a great cold take because it's in the last minute of this game. And that was sort of a theme of this game. And I talked about this with Doring later on.
Them not knowing what they're talking about?
Well, just looking ahead to the Rose Bowl too much and discounting the winner of the Auburn-LSU game. Coldest take from the broadcast actually for me came from the College Game Day beforehand. Now, if you go back and you watch this on YouTube, like I said before, there's about 8 or 9 minutes of the best of College Game Day that they put into this at the start. Bless their heart, whoever put this all together. It's great. It is fantastic. Seriously, go back and watch all of it. Don't just skip through it. Herb Street is making his pick, and he says, "This is not going to be a close game. Florida will win in a big, big way." Herb Street is still looking really, really young in all of this, too. And Herb Street, I feel like, doesn't come out and say stuff like that as much anymore because I am sure afterwards Tennessee fans let him have it. And I don't know, we've heard stuff like this before about players sitting in their hotel room and when they see all 4 people on College Game Day pick against them, they're like, all right, that's what fired us up, and then they bring it up in the postgame. I don't think that actually makes that big of a difference, but this was part of the feeling at the time of, holy crap, like Florida's going to win this game. Florida doesn't lose in the swamp. This is what they do. So Herb Street, I should say.
4 games, the entire
11 years before that.
The 11 years under Spurrier. They lost 4 total games at home.
Corso high-fived Herb Street right after, and he puts on Albert, the alligator head, like all that stuff. Herb Street's quote was actually right after our guy, Tony Barnhart, Mr. College Football. He did the piece about the 3 Florida receivers, and he gets a little bit fired up, where the camera actually zooms in on him a little bit as he's about to make this pick. And I don't really see Tony get this fired up except when he's about to make this pick. And maybe it's just the electricity of the game or whatever it is. And he says, "And Kirk, that's why the Gators get it done today." And they move on to the SEC championship. And the place goes berserk because maybe Florida fans know, like, Tony's a Georgia guy. I mean, they probably know that bias. And to see him that fired up in that moment, to me, I thought that stood out. And that spoke to how much confidence Florida had going into this game.
So, just looking back on it, and I remember this season because they were so dominant the entire year. And we always like think about these teams where, under Spurrier, where they were going to win 10 or 11 games. Like, I mean, he won 122 games in 12 years.
It's pretty good.
They were ranked for 203 weeks of the 204 total weeks he was the head coach of Florida, and the only week they weren't was the first week of the season, his first year. Like, they were dominant. So the 18-point favorite thing, that may seem like a bit much, but just looking through their season, and again, Tennessee had just come off of giving up like 28 points to a Memphis team that wasn't very good. They won by 3 against a very bad Kentucky team.
There was questions about their defense for sure.
Yeah, and especially if you're going into like Vandy, well, in the beginning of the season, that first month, they were a top 3 defense because when they played Georgia, they were the number 3 total defense in the country. Mm-hmm. That was the hobnail boot game they lost. That another huge day from Travis Stevens, but like their whole season, it was just kind of like, nothing too overly impressive. It wasn't like they were dominating people like on offense or defense or anything like that. Florida, on the other hand, lost to Auburn on a last-second field goal. They beat number 15 Georgia by 14 points. Okay. They played 6 teams. They played 5 teams before Tennessee that were ranked. Okay. That Georgia game, they won by 14. That was the closest game they had the entire season outside of loss to Auburn.
Yep.
They beat people to a pulp. I think the next closest was 29 points, and it was on the road in Death Valley against a ranked LSU team. So it's just, I kind of get it. And I think more than anything, 2001, especially at the end of the season, was almost like this mini, like a JV version of 2007. It wasn't as much chaos, but there was some chaos at the end of the year.
Oh yeah, it really was.
I think people really, really were hoping to see what they thought they were going to see with them winning and then winning the SEC championship and having a rematch from the Sugar Bowl the year before and playing that Miami team.
It would have been even more playoff type madness, though Miami was clearly, in present time and in hindsight was far and away the best team in college football that year. I think the playoff system would have been fun, and it would have added even more fuel to a game like this. So the Jadeveon Clowney reminder that normal human beings don't play this sport. There's a couple different ways you can go with this.
Yeah,
I went with
a good one for this.
I went with Eddie Moore, who just delivered some thumping hits in this
Tennessee
game.
linebacker?
Yeah, Tennessee linebacker. And one of them was on a blitz where he just absolutely decked Grossman. And then there was another on this scramble where Grossman makes this unbelievable play to get this throw off. And Grossman gets this throw off where he like throws it basically underhand. Like a submarine pitcher or something like that, as he's falling to the ground, and he somehow finds Kelvin Kite, who's like maybe 5
4 yards away, and he threw it like 1,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, and then Kelvin Kite just gets rung by Eddie Moore. I mean, Eddie Moore just pummels him to where there's no doubt in my mind that's targeting in 2020. I mean, they would call that.
He was definitely concussed.
Yeah, they said on the broadcast, they said 2 minutes after the play, they're like, he has a concussion. They knew immediately right afterwards.
I remember to this day the comment my dad made while we were watching this game together when I was like 15, and he was like smoking a cigar or something like that, and he gets up and like ashes it, and he goes, "Yeah, Kelvin Kite don't know where he at right now."
Yeah,
and he just like walked outside. And I was like, "Huh?" And it was like, "Oh, you're right." Like that was the same thing I had, because there weren't that many. You know, like I don't want to say there weren't any like spectacular plays, but there was stuff that we had kind of expected to see or had seen.
Yeah.
I wrote down that, and then I said literally anything that John Henderson did. I mean, because he was just so dominant. But you know, like because like Gaffney and Caldwell, I'm probably misremembering this because they were obviously great receivers, but it's not something you see with like I don't know what's a good example. Like they weren't like these. It wasn't like Hilliard. Like Hilliard had that famous play against Florida State in the Sugar Bowl where he like stopped on a dime, the guy runs right past. Like they were good, but it was also they were in a really, really good system with like a good quarterback and a lot of talent around them.
I think in present day we would have watched what those receivers did and said, yeah, that's our reminder that normal people don't play this game. But watching it now, we've seen the position developed so much, and we see so many systems that really allow that. So it didn't stand out necessarily in the same way. The Trent Richardson, I can't believe they didn't make it in the NFL. There's
so many of these.
There are a lot of potential ones for this.
We didn't do the coldest take.
We did do the coldest take. I did my coldest take. Do you want to go back and do your coldest take?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to participate in the show.
All right. I thought your coldest take was going to be what you had said before about we're smelling roses.
No, that was just me being petty. But
okay. Go ahead.
Mine was like at the start of the second half. They're coming back from the break, whatever, and Blackledge is going over the game. And like I remember watching these when I was little, and it seemed very evident to me that like Vern Lundquist had no idea what was really going on, and Blackledge was the one that like knew the game. And so because Vern, like even with Gary, he'd always be like, "Ha, that's a good point." So Todd Blackledge says, "I don't think Tennessee can win this game unless they get Dante Stallworth and Kelly Washington to become factors at some point."
Yep.
Because so far Kelly Washington had 0 receptions in the first half. Stallworth had 1. That same drive, he said it on the first series of the second half. They each caught 1 pass. I think Stallworth had like a 20-something yard gain, and Washington had like a 13-yard gain. Neither one of them caught a pass the entire rest of the game. They ran the ball down Florida's throats and actually doubled their rushing yards in the second half they had in the first half, and it was.
Didn't matter.
I guess the number 6. Yeah, that was like the bread and butter.
Casey Clausen was not going to be the reason that they won that game necessarily. Okay, the Trent Richardson, I can't believe they didn't make it in the NFL. Speaking of that, for me, the most obvious one here is Travis Stephens. And you watch the way that he runs in this game, and you see him getting to the next level. I mean, just shedding tacklers in ways that it's noticeable now, it was noticeable then. Running up the middle, inside, outside, whatever.
1,400 yards.
Really good year. I mean, unquestionably all SEC first teamer, no doubt about it. He was a 4th round pick in 2002 after his fifth year at Tennessee, and all he did in the NFL was have 1 catch in his first game for 6 yards, and that's it.
So I'm glad you looked up the actual stats, because that's one of the people I had listed too, and that was like it was honestly kind of sad, because it was like, yeah, he had 1 reception in his first game.
Didn't have a rushing attempt in the NFL.
Ever.
Which is amazing watching back in this game, because you think you could just build an offense around that guy.
Well, and he got cut like at the end of that season after his rookie season.
He got cut as a 4th round pick.
I don't think he got picked up by anybody
until 2004, and
right.
then tried to make it and just couldn't do anything. You wonder, and this was something that I don't want to say that we weren't aware of, but we didn't necessarily cater to it as much in that time. Was just one of those guys who hit his limit as a running back. We always talk about that. You have your limit. There is a number of hits that you can take as a running back. As they always say, it's like getting into a car crash 25 times a game. And if he hit his limit, and that was just it, because I didn't really find anything as to what necessarily resulted in him not being that guy. And if maybe the workload that he got at Tennessee at the start had something to do with that, because it was insane what he was
I'll just tell you what the general consensus was around my household and most other dumb SEC fans from the time, was that there were either witch and or Indian doctors on Tennessee staff. Because Tennessee was like, it was kind of odd. Like they would be notorious where these people would get in these, it'd be like the Calvin Kite hit, like these like terrible looking hits that they're down on the ground, like it's like a stoppage of play. They have to go to the locker room, and then like 2 or 3 minutes later, they would just come sprinting out of the locker room. I'm mainly kidding. I don't think that's why he had a bad NFL career, but you never know. Witch doctors, man. That was a big thing that was in play in the late 90s in SEC football.
Why hasn't Tennessee been able to win since then? They don't have any more witch doctors.
Exactly.
Can't find them. They're few and far between.
So I had, like, they didn't really necessarily have, like, great college careers, but Tennessee was so loaded with recruits. Like looking back on it yesterday, I wrote down Michael Munoz, of course, Jason Respert. These are all guys that are in the top 10 of their all-time recruits. Jabari Davis, like the 6th overall recruit. I forgot Jason Respert, why he didn't pan out, and that's because he was like the top offensive lineman in the country, and he sexually assaulted someone on his official visit.
Oh.
And was facing up to 30 years in prison for doing it, and Tennessee still signed him on signing day before that was settled. I don't know if he ever played, but Michael Munoz was weird because I think he's a guy that had a lot of injuries, but that's an offensive lineman that had, in this same class, Tennessee had 3 5-star offensive linemen. The year before, they had 3 5-star running backs. And Munoz was like, obviously good pedigree because his dad was probably the best offensive lineman in NFL history.
Yeah.
And, had the size. He was an All-American coming out of high school. Ended up being an All-American his senior year at Tennessee and didn't get drafted.
That's so weird.
But
weird.
The draft like the way like
draft was
Major League Baseball draft was in like the 50s? Like was that how the NFL draft was like in like 20 years ago? I just don't remember it.
Maybe. There are some decisions looking back on that. Yes, we have the benefit of seeing what these guys ultimately turned into, but there are still just some things I just, for the life of me, cannot understand. And there are guys who pan out that you're just like, wow, like that did not see that coming at all. But
right.
Jason Witten being one of them. I mean, that was a guy who actually panned out, and you wouldn't look at anything he did this game and think that he was capable of being that guy. Did you have any others for the can't believe they didn't make it in the NFL? Any on Florida side?
So not really, because
they had a lot of guys making the NFL.
Yeah, I looked at him and I was like, oh yeah, I remember. Like Rashae Caldwell would probably be the closest, and he had
nice
like double-digit touchdowns. Like he played for like 6-7 years. But yeah, I mean Alex Brown. That like I still like I'm still confused right now in this present moment how he got drafted in the 4th round. That makes no sense. But for the most part, it was maybe Brock Berlin, because Brock Berlin had a weird story, like almost like a Mitch Mustain, Blake Barnett type thing, where he was the consensus top player in the entire country from Shreveport, by the way.
There you go.
Ended up going to Florida and then transferred to Miami because he just wasn't getting a lot of playing time. But he was, I mean, that was a guy that was like a absolute cannot miss. Who was the guy from Michigan around the same time? Not Chad Henne. Drew Henson.
Drew Henson, baseball player, yeah.
Yeah, it was like that, where it's like, this is like, whatever he decides, like to, put it all together, he's going to be like a can't miss prospect, and he just never really did anything. This
category, I decided to veer off in a different direction because, like I said, I was 11 at the time and lived in the suburbs of Chicago. I wasn't watching this game. So this is usually, and we'll do this for you, the thing that you didn't know / remember until rewatching this game was what?
I'm just gonna be honest. It's that I forgot how much I hated Tennessee and Philip Fulmer. I just like and let me explain this because and I'm saying it somewhat in jest, but like the 2001 season is right on the heels of when, like, Bama's program was the worst, and they got put on probation because Philip Fulmer was a secret witness for the NCAA's investigation. This is all real. So I just hated Philip Fulmer. Just couldn't. And they beat us every year. Like, they were such a good team, man. So I would get so frustrated because like, watching Tennessee, it wasn't like watching Florida where they were dominating teams. It was just like, again, inefficiently efficient. They were always going to be like a good defensive, a strong defensive team. And they were really well coached with Fulmer. I just hated Fulmer.
That's one of those things that for you is just that's never going to necessarily change. Like you
Oh no.
Watching this will I imagine always bring up these memories of just like selfishly you're gonna think back to this game that Alabama lost, this game that Alabama lost. For
that
me,
stupid little smirk that he has, like whatever, like it's like the definition of like a blank eating grin. I couldn't stand him. He was the
it's almost like when you let go of a fart in public and you're like, yeah, somebody's gonna smell that a little bit, and I got away with it.
You want to like tell your friend, but you don't want to say it out loud. Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. I will say also, to be fair with Philip Fulmer, I still to this day have no idea why they ever fired him, and the success he had at Tennessee was incredible. He's a top, I don't want to say all time in SEC, but he's a top 10 coach easily in the last generation. He's a generational coach.
You'd have an argument to be a top 10 SEC coach of all time. With the national championship, I think he definitely has the argument. And to last at a big-time program that long is not an easy thing at all.
152 wins and 52 losses.
That's pretty good. That is pretty good. So because I don't have memories of watching this game, I decided to talk to people who do have memories watching this game. Now, I talked to Doring. I had a 15-minute conversation with him this morning while I think he was driving to work or something like that. He's got conferences all day. But Doring obviously wasn't playing in this game, but he was actually back in Gainesville, and he was rehabbing because he had a torn Achilles. He had torn his Achilles the previous year. He was kind of in between NFL gigs, so he was at the Swamp for this game. And he actually, because he had a little bit of a side hustle with a travel business as well, he had been talking with a bunch of people about Rose Bowl plans. And that was part of the cold take thing, because I think it was one of the first years, maybe it was the first year, where the SEC had a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. And that was a huge, huge deal at the time. And so he's talking to all these people at the game about, potential travel plans, and he's looking to make a little bit of money on the side. One of the things that he told me that he remembers is that Tennessee fans coming into this had always said, and Michael Bratton echoed this as well, Tennessee fans always say, Florida, if we played you later in the year, we would always be able to, we'd be able to beat you more often. And so, Florida fans kind of laugh at that. They're like, all right, whatever. And of course, they play this game in December, and Tennessee wins this game. And so it kind of has only added fuel to the argument, because Tennessee has struggled immensely since then, and they continue to play this game on the third Saturday of September.
Honestly, and like I'll defend Tennessee here for a minute. One thing I did forget about was I forgot how arrogant this Florida team was. And
they were confident.
They were arrogant. Like, they just, like, the way they carried themselves, the way they played, everything about it just seemed like there was never like any kind of there was never, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Humility.
Well, yeah, that for sure. But I mean, they just like, and I get why, because they were arguably the most successful program in the country.
Yeah, when you're putting up points, I think it just kind of, it's different, and you feel like you're ahead of the curve, and you're doing these new things that people haven't seen before. I get why that confidence, that swagger was there. It makes sense.
But I will say that the way that's set up, I mean, like you have to wonder, because it does kind of seem unfair. It's like, man, why was this game, which is that's the most important game in the entire conference for over half a decade in the late 90s, and it was decided, like, that whole division was decided before October started. It's just weird.
The Florida game also,
Florida never
not up to that point. It didn't have the same sort of impact, but since then it has been the pivotal game in the East, obviously. But that's such an interesting question of why not move this game to later on, and why haven't you heard maybe more from Tennessee to say let's do what we can to be able to move this game later in the schedule, because it makes sense from their standpoint also of like, wanting to just show, hey, this is the best version of ourselves. They have such a favorable schedule at the end of the year with Vandy and Kentucky, and Florida fans would always say, well, that's why you think you're getting so much better, is because these are the teams that you're playing. And you've said that before too. Like, it's a fair point to bring up. But Tennessee was healthier in this game as a result. If they had played earlier on, I think there were like four starters who would not have been able to play if this game was played in September as opposed to being played in the first weekend of December. So
yeah, well, and also like Todd Blackledge brought it up, like them not having a week off beforehand. Like Philip Fulmer was a kind of coach that he took things very personally as a coach, because he loved Tennessee. I mean, obviously still does, but it meant a lot to him to be the coach there, kind of like the Coach O thing. Maybe not overthinking it gave him like some more confidence, but because that game plan they had, I'd never seen that before in any of these matchups. But yeah, that is something though. I forgot how cocky, how arrogant Florida was.
Doring had some great other nuggets about this. I asked him about Spurrier because he is very, very tight with Spurrier, always has been, always will be. He didn't know anything about him going to the Redskins, even after the Orange Bowl.
I don't think he did.
Yeah, like I questioned kind of how all of that went down. Rex was coming back the next year after his redshirt sophomore year. Spurrier had told Doring while they were golfing at times, like, yeah, he's curious to see how his offense would translate to the NFL. There was a little bit of that curiosity there, and you got to remember this was a different time because NFL money was different than that college money.
Yeah,
I went back and looked this up. At the time with Washington, the deal that Spurrier signed was a record-setting deal for an NFL coach. It was 5 years, $25 million. At Florida in 1997, Spurrier signed a deal that was 6 years, $11.8 million. That's less than $2 million a year. That's like 2.5 times the money. I mean, that is way, way different. So looking back, Doring was saying how losing this game might have expedited this whole thing, but there was always that curiosity factor when there was the money that was attractive to somebody like Spurrier. Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense because he was somebody who thought that he could succeed no matter where he was. He's the most confident person that Doring has ever met, so I get that. The issue that Spurrier had at Florida, and this carried into his time at the NFL, was that the happiness of wins never matched the low of losing. And the stuff that he would get from fans and, you didn't win this game, you didn't do this, that's sort of just continued in the NFL. Because even in the NFL, if you're a good coach, you're 10-6, and you're still losing those games in a year. And it just hit Spurrier in a different way.
This is something I brought up like last year and caught a lot of flack for. But remember, Florida as a program, they had some good years in the 80s. They had like 3 good years in the 80s. Outside of that, I think they have 5 or maybe 3 like 10-win seasons or 9-win seasons. Their entire program history.
The quote that Spurrier had last year with
it's what I brought up like last year on the pod, and I caught so much like blank for it on Twitter from like Florida fans that like lost their minds because this was it's an odd program because it used to be everyone's homecoming. Like they were not a great program, and when he got there, it turned around like very quick. They won the SEC his first year.
The quote that Spurrier had at the Saturdays in the South screening that we saw, where he did the panel Q&A, where Laura Rutledge said, "Oh, you brought swagger back to Florida," and then Spurrier stopped her. He's like, "I brought swagger to Florida. What are you talking about?"
Yeah, they were he can't really. It's just if you didn't grow up around it, it's hard to even imagine that because like even for me, like I'm 33, they've been good for most of my life, but like. Literally the entire program before that, it was almost like if they're gonna hate this comp, but like almost like if Mississippi State or Ole Miss, like they had like some, like flash in the pan like years of success, like every 15 years, and that was it. And then all of a sudden they were just dominant, just like absolutely dominant. So I think that I remember hearing stuff like him getting kind of fed up with like the expectations from the fans kind of got out of control pretty early on. But also, I think that his thing, like I don't think he was intimidated by Tennessee at all. I don't think he's intimidated by anybody. But it was really interesting when he did leave, because you look at when Tennessee won the national championship. It's the year after Peyton left. The following year, they ended up they didn't make the SEC championship game, but they won 10 games. They went to the Fiesta Bowl in '99. 2000, they should have beat Florida, and I think they also went to a BCS Bowl that year. Tennessee was very, very close to having like a mini dynasty from this stretch where they could have won, at least played for 2 to 3 national championships.
Yeah, easily could have. And so Spurrier, Doring was actually one of the few Gators, he said, who actually wanted Spurrier to go to the NFL because he was in between NFL jobs, and he's thinking, Spurrier comes to the NFL, I'm for sure gonna get a job. And sure enough, Spurrier goes to the NFL, and he brings CD to the Redskins. So the next year in 2002, this was a great little nugget that CD dropped. He said that when they had Ron Zook take over, Rex and Taylor Jacobs used to audible to old Spurrier plays without Zook even knowing. They would just audible to it like without the permission of the OC or anything like that. They would just do it because that was what they felt comfortable running.
Probably a better move.
Yeah. Speaking of Rex, CD remembered Rex being the first guy to kind of be busted for the camera phone era that began in the 21st century. Yeah, there was like a photo that leaked out. I think it was like it might have been cocaine or it was some
cocaine.
Yeah, there's a photo that wasn't very flattering. Google Rex Grossman photos, and it's just. It is a litany of awful. Rex liked to party. That was no secret whatsoever, and so CD
he was like
knew
Jay
that.
Cutler's evil twin.
A little bit.
Like a clean-shaven. What do you call it? Whatever. I just forgot his name.
But he would, Rex wasn't a playbook guy, but he knew everything, and he would just show up to practice and just dominate. And it just like that was kind of the way that he operated, and it was just get me out of bed. It was, a little bit of a Dennis Rodman type thing. Nobody would make that comp necessarily, but he just get him to practice and watch that guy work, and then sure enough he would be able to do just that. So Neil Blackman, who does great work for us, writing a lot of Florida stuff, he was at this game. He went to this game with the flu. Rex was actually his neighbor. He was miserable, but he didn't want to miss this game. He remembered Florida fans being so confident that Tennessee wasn't going to win that day, and that even though Ernest Graham was going to be out. Florida hadn't trailed at home, as Neil reminded me, all year until Tennessee scored that first touchdown in that game. 4 home losses in the last 11 years that we'd brought up. And he remembered people being like, hey, we're going to face Miami in the national championship. We're going to go to the Rose Bowl. We're going to face this all-time great Miami team. It's going to be a great event. And Neil, as he said, remembers looking around at the stadium and seeing people just crying, like Florida fans, devastated to lose this game. And when they don't get the 2-point conversion at the end and realizing that, holy crap, this is all going away. And Neil said, it was as crushed as I've ever been from a sporting event, and I'm a Braves fan. That says it all.
And again, it was, and I don't think the all-time Miami team was even as much of a thought, because it seemed like maybe an all-time Florida team. Like this was like would have been an awesome matchup of, like, I wrote down the stats, like Miami led the country, or was a 1 or 2 in the country in scoring defense, passing defense, like interceptions. Like it would have been an awesome matchup to watch.
It really would have been.
Like the thing I tried to say earlier about they'd won 8 out of the last 10, you just kept expecting them, like, all right, when are they going to turn it on? Because even it being a close game isn't cause for concern. 4 of the last 5 going into this game in the series were decided by 6 or less points, and they were all won by Florida.
Didn't matter, yeah. And I talked to Michael Bratton as well, who, he's a Tennessee grad, and he remembered, obviously, like, immediately how unstoppable Stevens was that day, and he had the great Casey Clausen stat. He said that Casey Clausen actually had the most SEC road wins ever, and that might have just been at the time, but he was 14-1 on the road during his career.
I hate that I would believe it, but I would believe it.
He'd always get those little bootlegs. That was what he did. But he was good enough to win this game. What were you going to say?
So the bootleg comment, like talking about like where the game was like lost or whatever. This one play,
let's
like
dig into
4th and 1. So I honestly, as much as I hate Casey Clausen, I got so increasingly frustrated watching Rex Grossman, and he did this like multiple times, like in big games, like the Auburn loss. He threw 4 interceptions. There was just different times where he seemed like he was too overconfident or too comfortable, where he wasn't like going through the right like reads or progressions, and he
wasn't managing the game. He was just doing what he wanted to do.
Right, he was being kind of lazy about it. So in this game in particular, they had something ridiculous, like in the third quarter, 28 like quarterback pressures Tennessee did, which is outrageous. But there was like, he just constantly made mistakes, especially when it was like later in the game, like on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. They had like a bunch of pre-snap penalties that I still like raised my blood pressure on, even though I'm not a Florida fan. But there was a play on 4th and 1 where Clausen rolled out to his left. It was like a bootleg, and they were just designed pass, and the pass wasn't there. And there was not a lot of room to run, but there was like 3 yards available, and it was 4th and 1. So what Casey Clausen did was just awkwardly run with his I think his knees hit each other when he was running. It
It's so awkward.
But he just
Crazy
ran
legs.
and did this terrible dive, like it wasn't on purpose, but it was, and got the first down. Like that kind of stuff is what won the game. Like that's all you had to do.
Watching that too, isn't it so weird watching these games back before we did the yellow line for the first down? And you're like, wait, why is he diving? I had to be reminded of that constantly. How do we do that?
Was the quality of the TV?
It was so
Everyone's
bad.
like, it's CBS, SEC, it's HD. Like this HD sucked.
It's terrible. I thought the key moment in that game where Tennessee is up 1, 10 minutes left, they're deep in their own territory, and Travis Stevens rips off that 68-yard run. And
69.
You could just, was it 69? Oh, nice.
69, yeah.
And you could just hear the swamp just go like, oh, crap. This might not be our day. He ran over Gus Scott on that play, too. Just blew him up. Got the balls into the red zone. They were able to punch it in and score. The rushing advantage of this game was just so lopsided. 251 to 21 it was at that point, despite the fact that, like we said, Florida number 6 in the country against the run. Tennessee just flat out dominated this game in the trenches. They absolutely did, and nobody really kind of thought that was going to happen, but that's one of those things where if that's, because I always think that if you're going to win in the trenches, you have to have a little bit of extra juice. You got to have a little bit something in the back of your mind that's just making you go, we want this more than you do. And the big underdog thing, if that played into it, that wouldn't be incredibly surprising.
Or having a D tackle that was okay with stomping on people's faces. Whatever. I mean, either way. What's weird too is they brought up the stat where in that series, like before this game, 10 of the previous 11 years, whoever had like the least amount of turnovers and most rushing yards, it was like they had won, but it was like a staggering difference. It was like, like the losing team had an average of 75 rushing yards and 3 turnovers. The winning team had an average of like 150 something. But when you think of like a Philip Fulmer team, and as much as I dog on him and didn't like him, as a rival, he was a great coach, and all of his teams were just like this. Like they were very solid in the trenches. They were like very tough and gritty, like hard nosed. I never thought about that with Spurrier. And even hearing they had like the 6th best rush defense in the country, it was like it almost felt like, maybe because I knew the outcome, but like that was like more of like a facade or like kind of like a paper champion type thing, because it was not. They didn't look as good as Tennessee.
And Florida's offensive line got dominated in this game. They kept showing the pressure stats with Grossman, and it was at one point 28 pressures on Rex Grossman. It's like, how's that possible?
One thing about the Grossman, as like the game went on, I think Blackledge kind of came out of this, but you brought up the play where he I think you even said it was like something like, it's like this incredible play where he's like, stumbling and throws it underhand. When he threw that, I was like, I said out loud last night at 1:30 in the morning watching, I go, what the hell are you doing?
It was so bad.
And
he had so many plays like that.
So many. And Todd Blackledge goes, that's just instincts. That's just pure instincts. And it was like, Todd, you're an idiot. Like that is not the word for that.
There were 2 other plays in that game where they should have been fumbles. They should have absolutely been fumbles, and without the aid of replay, there was nothing that could overturn it. But you're just like Rex has like a 300-pound defensive tackle taking him to the ground, and he's trying to throw it over their helmet at
several times.
I don't know, but there were
he
several
turned his back
instances.
to one of them at one point, and it threw I tell you what, y'all think Bama gets all the calls? Florida got all the calls in this game.
Yes,
there was again, if you go back and watch the game, keep a tally, because it was not exaggerating. It was a minimum 3 times where he was being dragged to the ground and still tried to throw a ball to where no one was open.
It was really alarming to watch that. And as a fan, I can't imagine being a Florida fan watching that, and knowing that is what you have pinned all your hopes on. Let's say that Florida had gotten a pass interference call on that 2-point conversion. I'm not saying there was pass interference on the play. I don't think there was. But let's say they had gotten a pass interference call on that game. They get another chance to run the 2-point conversion, and Florida ultimately wins this game in overtime. What would have happened afterwards if the result was
did we do the blow it part?
Yeah, mine was the Travis Stevens 68-yard run that Florida allowed. I thought you just did this. You just did this because we went into that with the
I just made a point that Clausen had a good play.
I thought that was the 4th and 1 that he had converted.
I have several reasons why they blew it. And
Fire away.
I'm heated, so I want to say them. Okay, so I thought this was going to be like the only one, and then it just kept going, and it took up so much of my entire page of notes. So 4th and 1, there's 1:09 left in the third quarter on the Tennessee 40. Florida's up 23-21. Florida's up in this game 23-21. They didn't deserve to be. They threw away several opportunities in the first half, had to like settle for field goals because of like bad plays from Grossman. They get a false start, which I'm not even a Florida fan. This game happened 20 years ago. Still makes me so mad. So it makes it 4th and 6. They go for it for some reason, and Grossman gets sacked. And that was a play too, where that was one of the times where he's being dragged to the ground and still tries to throw it. And it should have been a fumble, and nothing came of it because Tennessee got the ball back. Tennessee goes right down the field, scores, and takes the lead like in the next like 3 plays. Travis Stevens breaks off like a long run or whatever. So then like it blew my mind because it was like, you have the lead, you're on their 40, just punt them deep. Like are you that worried about Casey Clausen? Like just punt them deep because you have a good defense. And now instead you find yourself at the start of the fourth quarter. They had not been trailing in a fourth quarter the entire season. Even when they lost to Auburn, that was on a last second field goal. So they hadn't trailed at all this late in the season. It's the last game of the year. So like, you know, that brings a lot of added pressure because all of a sudden now it's the fourth quarter and you're down. The next possession, that was when Clausen had the 4th and 1, which I thought was like just a perfect example of like what to do and what not to do. Stevens, he rips off a 34-yard run. They hadn't trailed in the game all season, like I said. So they take it to a second. Damn it, what is this? Oh, so they get the ball back, and it's like still like 7.5 minutes left, or maybe there's 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Grossman on 3rd and 15 calls a timeout.
Weird.
And it's their second timeout, and it was like, it's 3rd and 15. Like this is a great offense, but I don't think this is something you like necessarily have a great play call for.
Yeah.
They come back, and it was just like a standard like post that he threw in between 2 defenders, incomplete. So they have to end up like punting. UF didn't want, they at no point wanted to tackle Travis Stevens. So they get down, I think, like 8. Inexplicably, Philip Fulmer goes for 2.
Oh, yeah, going for 2. I forgot about that. I mean, Tennessee didn't blow it necessarily from that.
No, they could have.
They could have. They absolutely could have. Blackledge said, I just don't get this at all. Why are they going for 2 in this instance to go from a 4-point lead to a 6-point lead? I don't know what the chart would say about that now. I think the chart would say that was
the field
dumb.
goal, they would have been up by 3 at the end of the game, and that 2-point conversion wouldn't have mattered at all.
Exactly.
So, anyway, so then like the last part, and this is like, you could just start to see Grossman. He wasn't like, he was a good player. He was not a leader, I don't think, especially in this game where he was just constantly making mistakes. And to be fair, he was like beaten to a pulp. Like most of the game.
He wasn't voted team MVP, and he was the Heisman runner-up as a quarterback.
That's a good point. Yeah. So there's 7.5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It's 3rd and 1, and I think they're like around midfield. 3rd and 1, they go under center. They had several 3rd and 1s like prior to this, and they ran the ball right up the middle every single time. Mm-hmm. And in the second half, they started having a little bit more luck on some plays, I guess, at least running. Like, it wasn't that bad. They threw a quick slant to Gaffney, and it wasn't even close. So then it's 4th and 1. They decide to go for it. Pre-snap penalty, again, makes it 4th and 6.
Spurrier's look after that play was just priceless.
Yeah.
I mean, there were key instances in which Florida could have turned the tide in that game and just ruined so many opportunities. I mean, there were opportunities sitting there for them, and not just the 2-point conversion at the end. Let's say, though, just hypothetically speaking, that Florida does win this game. Florida goes on to the SEC Championship the following weekend to play LSU. Here's the interesting thing about all of this. So we were still a month away from Spurrier resigning. We didn't know necessarily about the Redskins. What if we had known at the time and Spurrier made this big deal? And I guess this isn't necessarily what if the result were flipped, but maybe could this have flipped the result? If Spurrier told his team and told everybody.
Dramatic.
Yeah, like told everybody, look, this is it. I'm leaving at the end of the year. He wouldn't do that because it would hurt. It would essentially ruin your recruiting for like 2 months during a very key stretch there. But if he had just come out and told his team, this is it. Tell them in the locker room before the game. Leave it all out there. Let's go win us a national championship. The road to that starts right here. Does his team come out a little bit different because they were beat in the trenches in this game? Florida was not the more motivated team. It looked like Tennessee wanted it more throughout.
Oh, without a doubt. Well, and if you've, like I think that's like the nature of being the underdog, and you've lost, 8 of the last 10. And I think that was, it was always, you could say like how much more satisfying it was for Tennessee to win games like this as opposed to Florida, because, it was a big hump for them to get over. So, I don't. If he would have like just pulled like a super dramatic card and just been right before the game, like I'm leaving if you guys don't win, or like they sending me to Vietnam.
Or not if you don't win, but I'm leaving at the end of the year, because that's been done before. I mean, Buddy Ryan did that back when the Bears were playing in the Super Bowl, and he told his team before the game.
Bears podcast.
Told his team before that Super Bowl, and they played like this is the last game for our coach. And that type of stuff can sometimes matter. Different times, obviously, if that stuff ever leaks, then that's not necessarily the best look.
I think it could have made a difference, but it's like a huge hypothetical. I think though, if they did win, like there's like stuff in the second quarter where they had so many missed opportunities on just bad passes,
and they outscored them 20-0 in the second quarter. And
right,
they still left points out
it
there.
should have been worse.
Yeah.
Like they left a lot of points on the board, and again, that's where I kept saying like it seems arrogant. Like they just were never, they were never phased, which is usually a good thing, but like they just never seemed like they had like a sense of urgency at all.
Yeah.
And so if they would have won, I think what's interesting about it is they play LSU. LSU knocked off Tennessee. It was a huge upset.
Big time.
I don't know if that happens with Florida, because it's hard to beat a team twice. I think like Florida had played in the SEC championship game in '99 against a team they had already played once, and it's hard to beat a team twice, but they had already beat them by 29 points in Death Valley.
So that's and I know that one of the things to this is, would Florida have given Miami a better game than Nebraska? Possibly, yes. But I still think Miami was an all-time team, and I think that was ultimately Miami's national championship to win. Interesting point that Neil brought up. So this game afterwards, where LSU is able to beat Tennessee, all of a sudden there's this opening with Spurrier gone.
Yeah.
And it kind of was the beginning of Saban's rise in the SEC, where now, with Spurrier out of the conference, there is a new place. And Fulmer is obviously still one of the best coaches in the country.
It was his to take.
It was his to take, though. And there was this opening. And Saban seizes it because he beats Tennessee in this upset to spoil Tennessee's sudden national championship hopes, which were apparently still out there. That LSU team won 4 straight games against ranked teams and during that stretch.
Yeah.
And LSU recruiting, as Neil brought up, really, really got rolling kind of after this. And then they win the national championship 2 years later. If Spurrier stays, like let's say they win this game, he doesn't see this fatigue necessarily about losing in the SEC, and 12 years in the SEC at a program is enough time. Does Saban ever break through in the same exact way? I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, it's hard to say because Saban, he's like, the greatest college football coach of all time. So it would be hard to say. But what people always forget about this, and I'll be the first to remind you, is LSU had a losing record in 8 of the 11 seasons before Saban got there. And what he was able to build there is all of the foundation of what they've become. Coach O doesn't owe his success to Saban, but Les Miles definitely did in 2007. But no, so I mean, like it would be interesting because it's odd because like you said, like it's like the throne is open. Mark Richt was putting together some really good teams. That 2002 team, that was a 12-win team that went, or actually it might have been 13 wins that went to the Sugar Bowl. I think then 2002 to 2004 is when they had David Green, and they were in the top 5 nationally. It seemed like every year, and it's odd because you look at Tennessee's recruiting. Like I said, it was their 3 straight recruiting classes from '99 to 2001 were 1, 1, and 2 in the country, and they just stockpiled with talent. And I don't want to say it's a huge missed opportunity because I don't think anybody has beaten Miami, but it does do a lot more for your program if you are making it to another national championship, especially without the Peyton thing. People forget how big of not an obstacle, but like that thing with Peyton. Nobody thought Tennessee was going to be anything after he left.
Yep.
They went and Natty like the year after. You had Dennis Francione at Bama. You had Tommy Tuberville at Ole Miss. Houston Nutt was starting to come in there. I think that if Spurrier stayed, I still say Florida's probably the best team in the SEC. But those games with Saban, like there's probably a different narrative. Like Saban probably leaves for Miami a little bit earlier if he can.
I think it might have altered Saban's path. I truly do. And the rise that he had, he became, of course, what we consider now to be, many consider to be the greatest coach of all time, or the second greatest coach of all time, depending on if you want to bang the Bear Bryant drum. But yeah, what would his career have looked like, and would he have decided to go to the NFL? Would that curiosity have been there? Who knows? Or come back. Like, there's all these different things if Saban doesn't get LSU to this level with Spurrier opening the door. The last thing here, last category that we'll close with, the play or image that we'll always remember when thinking of this game. You go first.
It's just Fulmer's dumbass little smile at the end. It just rubs me the wrong way.
Got the Gatorade bath and everything.
Grossman constantly adjusting himself in his helmet and his jersey. And his
big
pads.
Jersey, big. The shoulder pads. He always had that where he would tuck them in, or the sleeves were way, way, way too big. He even did that in the NFL, where you're just like, just get smaller shoulder pads on your jersey. Yeah, it's weird.
I mean, Gaffney, like, he wore like the Michael Bennett shoulder pads, but just him constantly getting beat up. Like he was. Tennessee did stuff on defense that they had never done against Florida, and it showed. Like, they just brought like all these, not exotic blitzes, but pressure just nonstop. And the other thing was, and I remember this more than anything, was Jabar Gaffney in the end zone. I didn't think he was that far away from the pass, and I thought he was, like, when I first saw the play happen in real time, I thought he was going to catch it because it seemed like he had broken free, and like the ball's like heading pretty close to his general direction, and then he didn't like put his hands up at all. I guess probably out of reach. And him turning around to the ref immediately, looking for a flag and pulling on his jersey. The year after they got away with one on his touchdown. I'll never forget that.
That's a good lasting image. I know this was Tennessee's day. It was Tennessee's great moment. But looking back,
rain on it.
Spurrier without his visor, looking super stressed, is something that I'll always picture with this game. And Spurrier has this thing where he's always wiping his forehead. Always, for whatever reason.
Confused frustration.
Yeah, I mean, it is his thing. And without the visor, it's just that much more noticeable. Because if you're playing with a visor, you don't maybe see somebody's hair all messed up or something like that. But it reminded me, I actually watched the 95 Fiesta Bowl against Nebraska. God. When Spurrier just got, that Florida team got trucked 62-24, and I watched it in a Nebraska bar in Lincoln about 7 years ago. Of course, because that's what you do.
They were re-showing it?
Oh yeah, yes, that is a common occurrence in Lincoln.
Texas.
That is a very common occurrence in Lincoln, to rewatch old Husker National Championship games. Let me tell you about that. And in that game, Spurrier's just always wiping his forehead, and I think he went to the visor after that, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe it was like, night games, he wasn't using the visor, or what his role was necessarily, but he looks very, very naked without the visor, and I can't shake that feeling. I feel like whenever I see him without the visor, he loses.
You know what's weird too is they interviewed him after the game.
Yeah, they did.
Not Fulmer.
Well, Fulmer was getting the Gatorade bath, and they had one question for Spurrier.
That's a lot of Gatorade.
Yeah, and that's another image that obviously needs to be brought up, is him getting the Gatorade bath. And you could tell, it's the monkey off the back. Like, getting that win in the swamp for him meant something different.
30 years.
30 years is a long time. It's a long time. People don't forget that.
That he had that Six Flags body where it's like a front butt.
They call it a fupa.
Yeah, it just looks like just nothing but khaki and denim chafing.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what FUPA stands for. We'll save that for another time.
I know it is.
Yeah. That was fun. That was really good.
Yeah.
I hope both Florida and Tennessee fans enjoyed this. This is great for us to rewatch this game. Like I said, if you have not watched this game, go back and do it. It's on YouTube. It's great. It's awesome.
Yeah.
You feel the electricity, and this game was just a little bit different. I mean, it's cliche. It just meant more, but because this game was being played in December and the stakes of this being essentially a quarterfinal game for the playoff, it did have a different sort of feel to the Tennessee-Florida rivalry, which, hopefully is going to be getting better now that Tennessee, we've said that before.
Yeah, that is something. I hate when people say, like, college football is better when this is...
I'm not that person. I'm not.
But I do think, I do miss this being like a fun rivalry. I was trying to think. I don't know what game we're going to do next. Random thought real quick. I totally forgot 2001 that South Carolina was good. They were ranked in the top 15, both like when they played Florida and Florida and Tennessee. But which brings me to my next point. What is the next game we should do?
That's a good question. That's a really, really good question. Maybe we leave a little bit up to a certain vote in our SDS podcast Facebook group, which you should totally go follow if you have not done so yet. But
what if we do a deep dive into just a random Tuesday morning fourth quarter program workout with Scott Cochran from 11 years ago?
Let's do it. That'd be a lot of fun.
Really good.
No, I think that the issue though and not to say that I don't want input from everybody. I do. I absolutely do. But if you were a fan of a specific team, you would want to watch a historic game with your fan base, and then it leads it a little bit up to a popularity contest. So we do want to be able to talk to all of our listeners about which game we should do next. We have a few that are in the holster. Kind of TBD. We've done over half the SEC teams now for
have we done Ole Miss?
At least one game. We have not done Ole Miss, and I thought about, I don't know if this is old enough, the Katy Perry corn dog game.
It's the Alabama loss. You just say the
I know. I wanted to preface it that way instead of calling it an Alabama loss.
Yeah, well, just don't bring up Katy Perry. She's an angel. I was thinking instead the Arkansas one from the same year, 2015.
With the lateral?
25, yeah.
Ew.
Or the Auburn game, which was that was crazy because it came down to the wire, and both teams I think were in the top 5, and both teams were still in contention for the national championship.
Ooh. I think we're leaning towards an Auburn game for our next one. Potentially Ronnie and Cadillac. That could be another one of those games from 2004. I know that team didn't necessarily make a national championship, but that LSU game. That LSU game was fun, though. I had to go back and rewatch that for the GOAT Week series that we did.
I'm over your Big Ten crap. All the Chicago Bears references, and now you want to watch a 10-9 football game?
We're going to do a 2-0 game before.
I will not do that. That was a nightmare. I cannot believe that game actually happened.
In other words, TBD as to when we're going to do our next game. Maybe we're hoping to do about one a month of these. They do take a lot of time, though. I mean, I spent probably 6-7 hours putting a lot of these things together.
3.
Yeah, we definitely put in our fair share of work to be able to do this. But I'm glad we got to do this. Now we're back on track doing it. Just meant more, and hopefully we'll crank out a bunch of these in the future as well. So, Fulmer, Spurrier, HBC, Rashae Caldwell, Crazy Eye Rashae Caldwell. What do we need to remember?
Now listen up, man. Listen up, man. That's my best Philip Fulmer. It just, dang it, just meant more.